My name is Arden Kincaid, 34 years old. The general's voice still echoes in my head. Whoever wrote this, see me after. My throat went dry. Every Marine in that formation stood like stone, rain dripping off helmets and boots, sinking into Carolina mud. The air smelled like wet wool and diesel. Somewhere a flag snapped in the wind, sharp as a reprimand, and there I was, heart pounding, pulse in my ears, knowing every word he'd just read out loud came from my hand. The anonymous letter, the one that changed everything. I remember thinking, in that split second between his order and the dismissal horn, that courage doesn't always roar. Sometimes it just keeps your knees from buckling. 2 months earlier, Camp Lejeune had felt like it always did in early winter: gray skies, diesel fumes, and the constant hum of routine. I'd been in the Marine Corps for 12 years, long enough that the base felt less like a place and more like a pattern. Wake at 0500. Formations. Logistics checks. Paperwork. Convoys. Repeat. I was Staff Sergeant Arden Kincaid, Logistics Division. No reprimands, no medals worth framing, just steady work and good reports. My entire life was built on one belief: order meant safety. If the checklist was complete and every crate was where it belonged, then the world made sense. In a life I couldn't control, logistics was the one thing I could. Maybe that's why my father always said I'd survive the Corps. You follow rules, kid. Rules keep you from getting killed. He used to bark it more than say it. Cold beer in one hand, old service photo on the mantle behind him. Growing up in that house taught me fast. When you obey, things stay quiet. And quiet felt like safety. Then I saw him. Private Evan Roth. Barely 19, the kind of kid who still said, "Yes, ma'am," like he meant it. His bunk was near mine in the barracks, and every night I'd hear the same soundtrack. Muffled laughter. Too loud to be friendly. Shouts with a sharp edge. Thuds against metal lockers. Then silence. The kind of silence that hums with something wrong. At first, I told myself it wasn't my business. Recruits learned discipline. Tough love built Marines. That's what we all said anyway. But the bruises on his wrists, the way his hands shook when he signed for equipment, the tremor in his voice when he shrugged and said, "I slipped during PT, Staff Sergeant," didn't look like training. That looked like fear. He had a soft southern accent that some of the others never let him forget. One night around 2300, I passed the showers on my way back from the motor pool. The tiles echoed every sound, and I heard it before I saw it. Laughter that wasn't friendly, the slap of water, a voice sneering, "Sing for us, choir boy." I rounded the corner, just enough to see 2 corporals cornering him, spraying him with cold water while he stood there shivering in soaked shorts, arms wrapped around himself. One of them shoved his shoulder, hard. "Come on, Roth, sing that little church song. Maybe it'll save you." My rank outstripped theirs. I could have walked in, barked an order, written them up on the spot. My fingers tightened around the folder in my hand, my jaw locked. And I kept walking, not because I didn't care, because I knew exactly what stepping in would mean. 2 corporals with friends in all the wrong places. A chain of command that called hazing legacy when they thought no one important was listening. A reputation I'd spent 12 years building, cracked open in one night. Back in my quarters, I yanked off my boots and sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the Marine Corps Code of Conduct pinned above my desk. I'd read it 1,000 times without really seeing it. That night, one line burned into focus. I will never forget that I am a Marine, responsible for my actions, and dedicated to the principles which made my country free. Responsible, dedicated, principles. It used to sound like background noise. Now it sounded like judgment. Sleep didn't come. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw cold water and bared teeth and Evan's hunched shoulders. Somewhere around midnight, the quiet in my room got so loud I couldn't stand it. I got up, flipped on the desk lamp, and pulled out a blank sheet of paper. To whom it may concern. My hand hovered over the page. I could already feel the weight of what I was about to do. If I wrote it, there was no going back. If I stayed silent, I knew exactly what I'd become. The kind of Marine my father would have called smart, and my conscience would call a coward. I started writing. Dates, times, names, everything I'd seen. The bruises, the jokes that weren't jokes, the shower incident. I didn't soften anything, didn't trim the edges to make it easier to read. I wrote the line that sat like a stone in my chest. If no one speaks, someone is going to get hurt. When I finished, my hand ached. I stared at the bottom of the page, the space where a signature should be. My name burned on the tip of my pen. I imagined the fallout, the questions, the labels. Snitch, problem, emotional. I didn't sign it. I folded the paper cleanly, the same way I folded inventory lists before sliding them into binders. My heart pounded as I crossed the silent corridor to the duty officer's office. The hallway lights buzzed, the bass hum sounding like a warning. I slid the letter under the door and straightened up. The moment it left my fingers, fear hit me like a wave. Back in my rack, lying on my back staring at the ceiling, I felt something I hadn't in years. Fear, not of an enemy, not of combat. Fear of my own conscience. The next few days were quiet. Too quiet. The barracks changed. That wild, cruel laughter at night stopped. In its place came whispers. Someone had ratted. Someone had written a letter. Heads turned when I walked into the chow hall. No one said my name, but suspicion feels like a weight pressing between your shoulder blades. 2 corporals were pulled into questioning. They came back with red-rimmed eyes and clenched jaws. Later that week, the senior drill instructor stood in front of the formation and announced that hazing allegations were under review. Technically, his words condemned hazing. His tone condemned the whistleblower. That kind of cowardly behavior, he said, lips tight, undermines the bond of this unit. He didn't mean the abuse, he meant the letter. That night, as I stood by the vending machine counting out quarters, I heard soft footsteps. Evan approached, hands tucked into his pockets. He kept his voice low. "Ma'am," he said, eyes fixed on the soda buttons. "Whoever tried to help, tell them thank you." My throat closed. I wanted to tell him it was me, that I was sorry it had taken so long, that I didn't know if it would be enough. Instead, I swallowed and said, "Keep your head up, Private. Things will get better." He gave the faintest smile. "Yes, ma'am." But they didn't. Not at first. A week later, during weapons maintenance, I overheard 2 NCOs whispering just out of sight. "They'll find out who wrote it," one muttered. "Doesn't matter," the other grunted. "Whoever it was, career's done." I kept cleaning my rifle, hands steady, heart thudding behind every word. That was the thing about the Corps. It taught you how to field strip a weapon in under a minute, but not how to hold your ground when the enemy wore your uniform. By the end of the month, everything boiled over. We were ordered to assemble on the parade ground, full dress, no explanation. The sky hung low and heavy, the kind of gray that made the world feel smaller. Rain fell sideways, sneaking under collars and rolling down spines. The air crackled with something unspoken. Then the convoy rolled in. A black sedan, silver insignia gleaming on the bumper, a major general's vehicle, the kind of arrival that meant something was very, very wrong. He stepped out, tall, composed, eyes like polished steel. No umbrella, no hurry, just authority in motion. He took the podium, pulled a single folded sheet of paper from his jacket, and began to read. My letter, every line, every sentence. He didn't name names, but each word landed like a hammer. The abuse, the bruises, the warning. If no one speaks, someone is going to get hurt. Hearing my own sentences thrown back at me in his voice made my chest tighten. I felt naked in a sea of uniforms. When he finished, the silence was so complete even the rain seemed to hesitate. He scanned the formation, gaze moving slow, deliberate, like he could see straight through each of us. "Whoever wrote this," he said evenly, "see me after." My pulse spiked so hard I thought I might pass out right there in the mud. Every instinct screamed at me, "Stay quiet. Let someone else pay the price." But another voice, softer and somehow louder, whispered from somewhere deep inside, "You already spoke. Now stand up." The dismissal order rang out. Marines broke formation, boots sloshing through puddles, chatter bursting around me like static. I stayed where I was for a heartbeat longer, rooted in place, then turned toward headquarters. Every step felt heavier than the last. I walked toward headquarters like someone wading upstream. Every step felt like a choice I couldn't undo. Rainwater slid down the back of my collar, cold as a warning. Marines brushed past me, some glancing at me too long, some not at all, but each set of boots sounded like a countdown. By the time I reached the building, my stomach had tightened into something solid and sharp. The hallway was nearly empty, lit by a flickering bulb that made everything look a shade too pale. My reflection in the glass door looked older, harder, like someone who'd finally realized what standing up meant. I knocked. "Enter," the general's voice said from inside. When I stepped in, the air felt thick enough to wade through. The office was neat in the way only men with absolute authority maintain. Polished desk, perfectly aligned pens, a wall of commendations that gleamed like judgment. He didn't look up right away. He was holding a framed photo. My breath caught. It was Evan, younger, smiling, standing beside a man in uniform. The same man now sitting at the desk. I froze. The world narrowed to a point. "Close the door, Staff Sergeant," he said. My hand trembled slightly on the knob, but I obeyed. The click sounded like a vault sealing shut. "Sit." I sat, back straight, hands locked on my knees. He studied me for a long moment, long enough that I couldn't tell whether he was reading my face or weighing my soul. "You wrote the letter." It wasn't a question. "Yes, sir." "Why?" A dozen answers clashed in my throat. Anger, guilt, fear, but the truth pushed through, raw and steady. "Because someone had to, sir. What was happening to that recruit? It wasn't discipline, it was cruelty." He didn't flinch, didn't blink. His expression stayed carved from stone. "You're aware," he said evenly, "that submitting anonymous reports through unofficial channels is a violation of Standing Order 14C. "Yes, sir." "Then why," he asked, voice quiet but sharp as a blade, "not go through your chain of command?" I felt my pulse hammer against my ribs. This was the moment, the one that could end everything. "Because, sir," I said, my voice barely above a whisper but steady, the chain was the problem. For a heartbeat, I thought the floor might open beneath me, but instead of anger, something shifted in his eyes, something like pain or recognition, or maybe something that didn't have a name. He leaned back slowly. "My son didn't tell me your name." My head jerked up. "Your son, sir?" He nodded once, like dropping a stone into water. "Private Evan Roth." A chill raced up my spine. The letter I'd written, the hazing I'd witnessed, every detail suddenly felt sharp enough to cut. "He was placed in your unit for an internal morale assessment," the general continued. "None of the officers were informed. The results," he exhaled, long and tired, "were revealing." "I didn't know, sir." "Of course you didn't. That's the point." He picked up my letter again, reading aloud a line I wished I could take back and yet didn't regret at all. "If no one speaks, someone is going to get hurt." When he lowered the page, his eyes met mine fully for the first time. They weren't the eyes of a general assessing a Marine. They were the eyes of a father. "You were right," he said quietly. Relief and dread tangled inside me. "Sir, am I in trouble?" He gave a faint, tired smile. "That depends on what kind of trouble you believe in." The next morning, everyone knew the general had summoned me. No one knew why. Silence spread through the chow hall like fog. Conversation stopped when I entered. Trays clattered a little too loudly. I felt eyes on my back like heat. Corporal Miller muttered just loud enough, "Guess snitches get promoted now." I set my tray down beside him. Guess some Marines forgot what honor looks like. He stared at me, stunned into silence. The entire table went still. I ate quietly, heart thrumming like a second pulse. Later that afternoon, Bravo Company was called to the assembly hall. Officers filled the front rows. NCOs lined the walls. The general stepped to the podium holding my letter, folded neatly. "Courage," he said, "isn't a medal. It's a mirror. And when an organization stops recognizing its reflection, it has already lost its honor." He didn't say my name. He didn't have to. Dozens of eyes turned toward me anyway, some respectful, some resentful, most unreadable. The room felt like it tilted beneath me. When the hall emptied, I stayed seated for a moment, gripping the edge of the chair until my knuckles whitened. Everything I had feared was happening. I had become visible, noticeable, unprotected. The next morning, a runner delivered a sealed envelope to my rack. "By order of Colonel Dunar, report to command briefing at 900 hours. I dressed carefully, straightened every crease on my uniform, checked every ribbon. At 08:30, I stood outside the conference room. Through the glass, I saw them. Colonel Dunar, Master Sergeant Vance, 2 officers from legal, and the general. The moment I walked in, Dunar didn't bother to hide his displeasure. "Staff Sergeant Kincaid, sit." I did. The general didn't look at me. That worried me more than yelling would have. Dunar spoke first, tone clipped. "Your actions bypassed protocol, created disruption, and compromised chain of command discipline." "With respect, sir," I said, "I followed the only chain that still worked, my conscience." Vance scoffed. "This isn't a debate, Sergeant." "Colonel," the general interrupted, his voice quiet but cutting. "May I?" Dunar hesitated, jaw tight, then nodded. The general placed my letter on the table. "This Marine broke a rule, but she also exposed a rot. And when insubordination reveals a failure of leadership, his eyes shifted to Dunar. Perhaps we should reconsider who truly disobeyed their oath. Silence slammed into the room. Dunar shifted. Vance stared straight ahead, jaw clenched. Legal officers scribbled notes furiously. I kept my eyes lowered, trying to steady the shaking in my hands. Finally, Dunar spoke, voice stiff. Staff Sergeant Kincaid will not be charged. However, she is reassigned to internal logistics until further notice. Desk duty. Exile with the polite name. Yes, sir, I said softly. Dismissed. As I walked out, Miller leaned against the wall, smirk sharp enough to draw blood. Well, well, hero returns. I didn't break stride. You know the difference between us, Miller? He blinked. Enlighten me. When the storm hits, you'll look for orders. I paused just long enough. I'll already be moving. My new office sat behind the motor pool. 4 gray walls, flickering lights, and stacks of paperwork untouched since the Reagan era. Chief Petty Officer Lamb greeted me with a clipboard. Inventory, pallet rows 1 through 12. I nodded. As I turned to go, she said softly, Kincaid, you did the right thing. Don't let the noise make you forget that. Her words landed deeper than she knew. I sat at the desk that night, staring at the flickering overhead light. Everything I cared about suddenly felt fragile, smaller, but something else simmered under the fear, something like resolve. I hadn't asked for this storm, but I'd started it, and storms don't ask permission to keep going. Life in exile didn't explode dramatically. It just shrank, little by little, inch by inch, until the world I'd known for 12 years fit inside 4 gray walls and smelled like printer ink and dust. Internal logistics was buried behind the motor pool, far from the pulse of the base. The overhead lights flickered in a slow, wavering rhythm, like they were uncertain whether I deserved illumination. Stacks of requisition forms towered on metal shelves. Clipboards hung crooked on hooks. Everything looked like it had been forgotten or deliberately avoided, much like me. Every morning at 0700, I arrived to find fresh piles of paperwork waiting on my desk. Every evening, I left long after the hallways had gone dark, not because anyone asked me to, because there was nothing else left for me to do. The Corps didn't have to punish you loudly. Sometimes it simply erased you. Still, a few people held on to their humanity. Chief Lamb, with her steel gray hair and quiet eyes, was one of them. She never said much, never overstayed a conversation, but she always left a mug of coffee on my desk before she clocked out. No note, no explanation, just warmth in a world that had turned cold. Another was Chief Morales, an older mechanic I'd known from convoy runs. He'd survived more deployments than he could remember, and more leadership failures than he cared to recount. One evening, I found him leaning against the pier behind the warehouse, the ocean wind tousling his hair. Heard you shook the tree up top, he said, cigarette glowing between his fingers. I didn't mean to, I said, watching the tide slap against the hulls. Nobody ever means to, he chuckled, but sometimes the branches need shaking. We stood there in silence, the waves drowned out by the hum of generators. After a while, he added, Back in 92, I reported a captain for skimming hazard pay. Lost a promotion over it. He tapped ash into the wind. Took me years to realize the punishment was the proof I was right. His words settled over me like a weighted blanket, heavy, uncomfortable, honest. But the quiet war didn't stay quiet forever. By the end of the week, the isolation sharpened. My access credentials to certain files were suddenly corrupted. Requests I submitted vanished into administrative purgatory. Reports I sent up the chain returned in marked incomplete, even though I had triple-checked every line. When I brought the forms back to Lamb, she frowned. These weren't incomplete. Someone's playing games. I'll redo them, I said. She set her pen down. Kincaid, the Corps doesn't hate mistakes. It hates mirrors. And right now, you're holding up the biggest one this place has seen in years. I swallowed hard. Her words hurt because they were true. Around the same time, Private Evan Roth disappeared from the roster. Transfer complete. Assignment updated. His bunk empty. His nameplate removed. But his absence lingered like a shadow no one acknowledged. If people whispered about him, they did it quietly, quickly, as if speaking his name might draw fire. One night, long after taps, I stepped outside to clear my head. The base was quiet, the kind of quiet that felt like someone holding their breath. Under the dim floodlights, Evan sat on the steps of the barracks, coat pulled tight, duffel at his feet. "You should be asleep," I said softly. He gave a faint smile. "Can't. Too much noise in my head." I sat beside him. The concrete was cold through my uniform. "They won't touch you now," I said. "Not with the general watching." "Doesn't make it easier," he murmured. "The silence feels worse than the shouting did." I nodded. I knew exactly what he meant. Silence wasn't peace. Silence was exile. He turned toward me. In the low light, his eyes looked older than 19. "Do you think I'll ever fit in here, ma'am?" I thought of the years I'd spent bending myself into shape, making myself small to stay safe. "You don't have to fit in," I said quietly. "You just have to stand." It was the first real smile I'd seen from him. "Yes, ma'am." 2 days later, he was gone, and for a moment, I wondered if I'd done the right thing at all. But then, the note arrived. A small envelope on my desk, no return address. The writing inside was neat, deliberate, familiar. "Keep your compass true. The storm's not done. It's just changing hands." No signature. I didn't need one. I recognized Admiral Roth's handwriting. That note stayed in my pocket for weeks. I touched it when the silence cut too deep, when the rumors turned acidic, when the paperwork felt like a cage. Then, early one morning, everything shifted. "Base-wide inspection scheduled," the internal comms announced. Admiral Roth presiding. The entire installation fell silent, not the usual inspection kind of silence. A higher eyes are coming kind of silence. By 0900, the courtyard gleamed like a staged photograph. Trucks lined up with parade precision. Brass polished so bright it could blind. Even the gulls circling overhead seemed quieter, like they sensed the tension. Captain Briggs, whose leadership style could be described as fear in uniform, paced the concrete like a man auditioning for a promotion. His voice cracked across the formation. "Eyes forward, Marines. We are not just showing off our equipment. We are showing that this unit maintains discipline." Morales passed me with a wrench in hand, muttering, "You can polish a wrench all day. Doesn't mean the engine runs right." Then the Admiral arrived. No entourage, no flourish, just quiet authority wrapped in 4 silver stars. He shook Briggs's hand with a grip that looked more like a test of character than a greeting. "Captain," he said, scanning the courtyard, "let's begin." He didn't ask for charts, didn't ask for inventory lists, didn't ask for reports. "Bring me your morale logs," he said instead. "All of them." Briggs stiffened. "Morale is satisfactory, Admiral." "Satisfactory," the Admiral repeated, tasting the word like something sour. "Interesting. Because the reports I received suggest otherwise." A ripple of unease moved through the ranks. The Admiral continued walking, eyes sharp, voice carrying. "A Marine unit's strength isn't in obedience, it's in trust. And trust doesn't survive when silence is rewarded more than truth." His words hit the courtyard like a dropped grenade. By noon, we were escorted into the main briefing room. Senior officers lined one side of the table. The Admiral sat alone on the other. The air smelled like polished wood, sweat, and fear. He opened a folder. My folder. "Staff Sergeant Arden Kincaid," he said, eyes lifting to meet mine. I rose, spine straight, palms damp. "Sir." "You disobeyed a direct standing order during active duty," he said. "You bypassed your chain of command. Is that correct?" "Yes, sir." "Why?" My heart slammed against my ribs, but my voice stayed steady. "Because someone was being hurt, sir, and the chain of command was the problem." The Admiral's lips twitched. Not quite a smile. "Captain Briggs," he said without breaking eye contact, "do you concur that her actions jeopardized this unit's discipline?" Briggs straightened. "Yes, sir. The infraction was clear. She compromised." The Admiral cut him off. "Was any classified cargo lost?" "No, sir." "Was anyone injured?" "No, sir." "Did any mission fail as a result of her actions?" Briggs swallowed. "No, sir." The Admiral closed the folder softly. "Then the only thing jeopardized here," he said, voice steady as steel, "was pride." Silence detonated through the room. And for the first time since I wrote the letter, I felt something shift, a tilt in the storm, a break in the clouds, a direction change. The air in the briefing room didn't move. No one breathed. No one dared. Captain Briggs's face lost a full shade of color, and even the legal officers, who usually hid behind neutrality, looked rattled. The Admiral let the silence steep, letting every officer in that room taste the weight of his words before he continued. "Captain Briggs," he said, turning with slow precision, "you have confused obedience with leadership. They are not the same." Briggs straightened, jaw trembling just once. He looked like a man standing on a trapdoor that hadn't opened yet, but might. The Admiral rose from his chair. When he stood, the authority in the room shifted so sharply it felt like gravity itself changed direction. I have seen entire commands fall apart, he said, voice low but carrying, because officers protected their pride before their people, because rules mattered more than right, because silence felt safer than truth. He faced me. You made a hard call, Staff Sergeant, but the right one. My throat tightened. I forced myself to hold his gaze. Sir, I only did what... He raised a hand. What a Marine should do, he finished. What too few remember. He dismissed the room. Officers shuffled out, some avoiding my eyes, some offering tight nods they wouldn't have dared the day before. Briggs left last, shoulders stiff, swallowed by consequences he had spent years outrunning. When the door shut, the Admiral turned to me one last time and said quietly, "Storms aren't always meant to break you, Kincaid. Sometimes they break what needed breaking." He left, and the room felt lighter. Not safe, not triumphant, just lighter. That evening, everything changed. Rumor spread fast, carrying through barracks and mess halls like wildfire. Briggs had been relieved of command pending reassignment. No ceremony, no speeches, just gone. I didn't celebrate. Quiet justice wasn't something you cheered for. It was something you let settle. I walked alone to the parade ground at sunrise. The flag climbed the pole with a faint metallic rattle, colors slicing through the cool morning air. I saluted, not because protocol required it, but because, for the first time in months, I felt the Corps might still have a pulse worth fighting for. A runner found me an hour later, breathless, wide-eyed. Staff Sergeant Kincaid, report to Briefing Room 1, immediately. My stomach tightened. Again? The room looked different this time. Sunlight striping the table, dust motes drifting lazily in the still air. No tension, no hostility. Just the Admiral sitting alone with a single folder in front of him. "Take a seat," he said. I sat. He closed the folder gently, folded his hands, and said, "You've been promoted." My heart stopped. For a moment, sound vanished. "Sir?" "Effective immediately," he continued. "Your new rank is Gunnery Sergeant, and you'll serve as acting head of the Integrity and Conduct Initiative." My breath caught. "Sir, You earned it," he said, "not because you were loud, but because you were right." He slid the folder toward me. "This is Project Samaritan, a new program built on reforming our internal culture, hazing prevention, leadership ethics, mentorship. You're going to shape it." Words failed me. "Me, sir?" "Yes, you." His eyes softened, just slightly. "Because you've already taught this Corps a lesson most leaders forget. Rules guide us, but conscience saves us." When I stood to shake his hand, his grip was firm and warm, a handshake you remember long after the noise fades. "Make it count, Kincaid," he said. I walked out of that room lighter and heavier all at once, lighter with validation, heavier with responsibility. By afternoon, the announcement hit base-wide communication channels. Gunnery Sergeant Kincaid, new program. Lead Captain Briggs, reassigned. Project Samaritan, launched immediately. People who hadn't looked at me in weeks suddenly stopped me in the hallway, offering handshakes, awkward smiles. "Congratulations, ma'am." I didn't hold grudges. Quiet revenge had already happened, not by punishing them, but by proving them wrong. Chief Morales appeared in my doorway later, holding 2 coffees. He wore a crooked grin. "See," he said, "saints get eaten first. Then they write the rule book." I laughed, really laughed, for the first time in months. Guess the Corps finally acquired a taste for conscience. Weeks passed. Project Samaritan grew faster than anyone expected. Recruits started reporting small abuses before they grew teeth. Senior officers, some who once sneered at soft leadership, now quoted sections of the program like scripture. I spent long nights building modules, writing guidelines, meeting with training units. The work was exhausting, frustrating, and more meaningful than anything I'd done in years. One morning, a letter arrived in my mailbox. The handwriting was familiar. The return address read, "Officer Candidate School, Quantico." My chest tightened. I opened it carefully. "Ma'am, I don't know if you'll remember me, but I think of that night every time I face a hard decision. You didn't just help me. You reminded me what being a Marine means. My father says conscience without courage is wishful thinking. I learned that from you first. Second Lieutenant Evan Roth." I stood there for a long time before pinning the letter beside my desk, right next to the Code of Conduct, the one that started everything. Months later, the Admiral returned for a small ceremony. No cameras, no speeches, just morning light flooding a hangar and the smell of jet fuel. He pinned a silver oak leaf on my collar. "Gunnery Sergeant Kincaid," he said warmly. Your record now includes a commendation for judgment under crisis, for reminding the Corps that leadership isn't measured by obedience, but by moral courage. Applause rippled through the hangar, soft, respectful, real. As he stepped back, he added, just for me, "You didn't just change policy, you changed people." That night, I walked to the pier behind the motor pool. The ocean wind tugged at my uniform. The sun sank behind the ships, burning gold across the water. I stood there breathing slowly. Peace settled over me. Not pride, not triumph, just peace. I thought of recruits still learning to march in line, of officers learning what it really meant to lead, of a 19-year-old who once whispered, "Will I ever fit in?" I smiled. "You don't have to fit in," I murmured. "You just have to stand." As the loudspeaker called for evening colors, I saluted the lowering flag, not for rank, not for recognition, for everyone who ever stood alone in the storm and did the right thing anyway. Then I whispered, under my breath, maybe to the ocean, maybe to the Corps, maybe to myself. Sometimes the people we save end up saving us right back.